My name's Eli Monroe. I used to think forest silence was peaceful. That was before I took the night shift ranger post at the Great Smoky Mountains, before I found out what stillness really means, before I learned there are worse things than being alone in the woods. They say the forest is calm, serene, healing, but they don't tell you how the treetops sway when there's no wind. They don't tell you about the crunch of pine needles when no one's walking. They don't tell you about the ranger station that only hires night staff who never ask questions. I got the job after everything else fell apart. My cabin in Mendocino burned in a freak lightning storm. Insurance didn't cover half of it. My dog vanished the same week. I took it as a sign to disappear for a while myself. I needed something quiet, something removed, something where no one asked where I'd been. I remember the day I saw the ad. It wasn't online. It was taped to the inside of a public trail map kiosk near a hiking loop I'd never seen before. The paper was yellowed, curling at the edges, and taped from the inside, which meant someone had opened the locked glass case. It read, "Hiring, overnight ranger, Great Smoky Mountains, quiet work, high pay, absolute discretion required, apply in person." Just a set of coordinates scribbled in pencil on the corner. I figured it was nothing, but I had nothing, so I packed what was left in my truck and followed the map. The road narrowed into dirt and roots the deeper I went. GPS stopped tracking, just endless turns through trees thick with mist. And then, just past a deadfall and a crooked signpost, the ranger station appeared like it had been waiting for me. It looked abandoned. A squat log structure with moss-covered shingles and a single, flickering porch light. The area around it was empty. There were no nearby buildings, no vehicles in sight, not even a single trail marker. Just a hand-painted wooden plaque nailed above the door, Great Smoky Mountains Ranger Post 17. Inside, it smelled like cedar, ash, and something metallic. The desk was empty. The walls were lined with maps and pinned reports. There was a coffee pot still half full and cold. A chair creaked behind the desk. The ranger looked up, a woman in her 50s, face weathered, expression unreadable. She pushed a ring of keys toward me without standing. "Eli Monroe, right?" I nodded. She jerked her chin toward the keys. 4 of them, brass and old. Cabin shed, storm shelter, signal tower, and one you'll figure out when the time's right. She stood slowly, grabbed a worn jacket off the hook, and stepped past me without another word. I followed her outside more out of instinct than decision. A truck idled just off the gravel. She climbed in, the window already halfway down. Logbooks in the office, rules are there, don't skip them, they're not guidelines. Then she pulled away, tires crunching over stone. She didn't ask for ID or paperwork. Her taillights disappeared into the fog as if the trees swallowed her whole. The post was mine now, along with whatever cryptic rules she'd left behind. I stood there a long time before I moved. The silence pressed against the windows and logs like it wanted in. I found the logbook an hour later, thick, leather-bound, pages worn with time. It wasn't on the shelf. I found it inside the desk drawer, tucked beneath a false bottom. First page, rule number 1. Do not leave your boots outside the cabin overnight. If you find them moved, burn them before sunrise. Rule number 2. If the emergency radio plays your voice, shut it off, right away. Rule number 3. If you see an elk with only one antler, do not follow it, no matter what. Rule number 4. Campers who don't blink go to Site 34. Do not visit Site 34. Rule number 5. If you find a pocket watch in the forest, bury it deep. Rule number 6. The trees whisper at dawn. Don't listen. Rule number 7. At 2:04 a.m., the signal tower beacon shuts off. Reach the west panel and flip the manual switch before 2:13. Don't linger near the cables after the switch is flipped. Rule number 8. If you see a second moon rise, get underground. I skimmed the list once, then slower. Some felt ridiculous, others too specific to be anything but earned. This felt more like a leftover entry in a survival journal. a record someone hoped would outlast them, a warning left behind by whoever came before. Just after midnight, I slid the deadbolt across and stood in the dark, listening for something I couldn't name. The station groaned like it remembered being full once, alive with movement and voices that had long since faded. But now it was just me, a set of strange keys, and a leather-bound book that whispered warnings through ink. I walked the perimeter with a flashlight I found in a drawer. The beam barely touched the thick mist. Every branch seemed too still. Every gust of wind sounded like a word I almost recognized. At one point, I could have sworn I heard the crunch of footsteps behind me. I turned fast, just trees, just dark, but I didn't make the same turn again. Back inside, the heater clicked on by itself. I hadn't touched the thermostat. I hadn't even seen one. I sat behind the desk, not for any task in particular, just to be still without feeling watched. I opened the drawer again and flipped through the logbook. Most pages were empty, but some had short entries, initials, dates. One said, "Third night, didn't follow number 5, haven't slept since." I traced the page with my finger, the ink smeared slightly under the touch. Someone had written it fast. I made coffee even though I didn't want it. The mug was chipped and stained, but it gave my hands something to do. Outside, fog rolled by like it was pacing. A noise came from the storm shelter hatch around 1 a.m. I hadn't even checked it before. It was flush with the floor near the back hallway, metal bolted shut. The sound wasn't loud, just a low hum, like breath through a vent. I didn't open it. I stayed up till the first light, reading the rules again. The rules didn't feel real. Not exactly. But something in the forest's silence urged me to keep them close, like it was holding its breath, watching how I'd react. I woke up on the worn couch in the ranger station's main room, back stiff, throat dry. The kind of sleep that feels more like a blackout, a dreamless collapse. I didn't even remember laying down. The logbook was still on the desk, half open. Morning light struggled through the tall windows, the beams thin and watery. Outside, the fog hadn't lifted. It hovered between the trees like it didn't need sunlight to exist. The forest was suspended in breathless pause, every leaf drenched in that still, cold mist. I pushed myself upright, boots thudding on the old wood floor. That's when I noticed them. My boots. I always leave them side by side. It's a habit from firefighting school, where gear stays neat, always ready. But now, one boot faced the door. The other was tipped on its side, halfway across the room near the hearth. I stared for too long. My first thought was that I'd kicked one off in my sleep. Then I remembered the rule. Do not leave your boots outside the cabin overnight. If you find them moved, burn them before sunrise. They hadn't been outside, but they had moved. Sunlight edged higher, dull and gray, like a light bulb dying out. I picked up the boot near the hearth. It felt warm, as if it had been held recently, the kind of warmth that felt borrowed. I didn't burn them. Instead, I sat on the edge of the desk and stared at them for what felt like an hour, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. By midday, I convinced myself it didn't count. The rule said outside. I had followed it. Technically. Still, I kept looking at the tree line. The wind made it sway like a mirage. Something about it kept suggesting movement just beyond the reach of the eye. I spent the rest of the day walking the perimeter. There were paths here, but they weren't marked. The undergrowth had been cleared in lines that didn't match any official trail maps. Like someone had walked them so many times, they became routes of their own. At the west edge, I found something odd. A rusted horseshoe nailed into a tree trunk, upside down. Moss had begun to reclaim the nailhead. No sign it was part of any survey work. Felt older, like folklore left behind. Nearby, wedged between two rocks, I found what looked like a shattered compass. The casing was brass, and the needle snapped clean. On the back, scratched letters barely legible. EM 1994. No record of that name in the logs. No ranger by those initials. It gave me a chill. I tucked it into my jacket pocket, unsure why. Around 3 p.m., I passed the signal tower. It stood tall over the treetops, its steel frame covered in moss and old bolt scars. The beacon was off, but I knew it would wake later. 2:04 a.m. manual override. I stopped to inspect the wiring box beneath the tower. The padlock had been twisted, still intact, but clearly stressed. Someone had been here before me. Maybe the last ranger, maybe not. On the way back, I heard movement, low and to the right. Something heavy. I crouched, hand going to my flashlight. But nothing emerged. Just the hiss of wind brushing the brambles. I veered off the path and found a spot where the ground had been disturbed. A small indentation. Fresh. Too large for raccoons or deer. I photographed it with my phone. When I looked up, the trees had closed in tighter than I remembered. Back at the cabin, I brewed a new pot of coffee. The stale kind with burnt edges. It filled the silence. I chewed jerky, reread the rules. The whisper one always stuck with me. The trees whisper at dawn. Don't listen. I didn't know what to do with that. It felt vague, poetic. But so had the boots' rule, and that had come close. That night, I thought about my training years back. Fire camps up in Idaho. We rotated night watches and took shifts in pairs. There was this one guy, Lenny, who always said the dark carried weight. We laughed. Until one night he vanished for 4 hours, swore he just blinked, swore the sky had turned green for a second. No one believed him. We should have. Later, I cleaned the cabin floor with a bristle broom I found in the closet. The linoleum tiles creaked as I moved, especially near the supply cabinet. Something behind the cabinet wall clicked 3 times while I swept. I froze, listening. Nothing followed. The generator gave a cough before kicking into a low hum. Lights flickered once, then steadied. I noted it in the log. I made sure the boots were inside, tucked beneath the desk. I even looped the laces together, knotted tight, just in case. The sky outside turned to tar. I could feel it pressing against the windows, thick with unseen movement. Fog drifted low, crawling along the forest floor. I drank another mug of coffee, barely tasting it. At 1:51 a.m., I stepped onto the porch for a breath. No sound, no bugs, just fog and moonlight. There was something ancient about the quiet. Not peace. Waiting. I thought I heard something soft. It wasn't exactly a voice, more like something carried by the air that came from the trees, steady like a breath speaking through pine. I stepped back inside and shut the door. I should have burned the boots earlier. I kept thinking that. It repeated in my mind like it was being whispered from behind, but it was my own voice, turning doubts into regrets. At 2:30 a.m., the generator cut for a moment. Darkness swelled in the corners. Then the light returned, weaker. The clock blinked at 12:00 for a second before correcting itself. At 4:38 a.m., I found myself half asleep in the chair. Sleep held me in its grip, somewhere between consciousness and oblivion, where time lost its edges and nothing had weight. Then a soft pop, like a bubble bursting. The boots were gone, not far, just moved. One behind the door, one beneath the window, still inside, but wrong, out of place like teeth missing from a smile. I didn't hesitate this time. I grabbed both and carried them to the fire pit outside. I lit them. They burned easily, too easy. No rubber should catch that fast. The flames popped once, high and sharp, then silent, nothing left but black husks. I watched until nothing remained but a ring of ash. When I looked up, the trees seemed closer, subtly leaning in, curious. At 5:30 a.m., the trees started whispering. It wasn't quite a sound, more a pattern of movement in the air that shaped itself like words were being formed by rustling branches. like language born from bark and breeze. I stood on the porch, eyes closed. I didn't want to listen, but I couldn't move. A phrase rose from the wind. Should have burned them sooner. I backed inside, locked the door, didn't open it again until the sun cleared the ridge. In the logbook, I added a note. Boots' rule is not a metaphor. Then I wrote the time. 6:12 a.m., still shaking, and the whisper was still echoing. It didn't stay in the forest. It settled somewhere inside me. Chapter 3. The Elk and the Beacon. The morning light came late. I'd been watching for it since 5:30, waiting for the first slip of gold through the thick trees. But when it arrived, it was dull, a weak shimmer fighting the grip of fog that hadn't moved all night. The ranger station was still. The cabin held stillness, the air thick with lingering quiet, thick like syrup. I hadn't slept. Not really. Every sound in the cabin twisted itself into some imagined threat. Floorboards settled like footsteps. Wind tapped like fingers against the window. I stared at the ceiling until color returned to the world. I boiled water for instant coffee and sat by the logbook. Reading my entry from the morning before felt like reading a stranger's journal. Boots' rule is not a metaphor. I'd written that. My handwriting looked different, shaky, more like a confession than observation. There was no note today. No new rules are tacked onto the board. But I checked them anyway, counted each one. 8 in total. My eyes stopped on number 3. If you see an elk with only one antler, do not follow it, no matter what. Something about it unnerved me more than the others. Maybe it was the implication that it would want me to follow, that it could. I spent the morning walking slow laps around the station's perimeter. The fog had pulled back slightly, revealing damp leaves and the gnarled roots of pine and birch. I followed a narrow game trail behind the shed, just to move, just to feel the air in my lungs that wasn't soaked with fear. Half a mile in, I found something odd. A cluster of stones arranged in a circle. 7 total, each marked with a crude X. It didn't look natural. The moss growing between them had been scraped away recently. I knelt to touch one. The stone was warm. A sound stopped me. The distant creak of metal. Faint but rhythmic. I knew that sound. The wind had kicked up at the signal tower. The tower. I checked my watch. 1:36 p.m. Still daylight. But my stomach twisted. The override didn't trigger every night, but when it did, it had to be handled fast. The tower's light would shut off at exactly 2:04 a.m., and if it wasn't turned back on by 2:13, something would notice. The signal tower stood like a skeleton above the pines, its rusted frame groaning as the wind tugged at the cables. I climbed the short hill and approached the control box, still locked, but the padlock had fresh scratches near the base. I jotted that in my pocket notebook. The metal ladder groaned under my boots as I climbed. From the platform, I could see across the canopy, endless waves of green and brown in the haze of low clouds. There were no signs of human presence, nothing but endless wilderness stretching to every horizon. That's when I saw it. Down below, half obscured by branches, stood an elk, tall, brown, majestic almost, but only one antler. My breath caught. It didn't move. I stared at it for nearly a minute, watching the fog shift around its legs. Then it turned its head slightly, as if looking at me, and stepped forward, into the brush. It was leading. I gripped the railing. My heart pounded. Do not follow it, no matter what. Still, my legs twitched. My hands itched. Something deep in my brain said, go. I forced myself to descend the ladder, slow, steady, whispering the rule under my breath. I wouldn't follow. I wouldn't. But by the time I reached the ground, the elk was gone. Back in the cabin, I checked the logbook again. No updates. I brewed coffee and stood staring out the window. The forest felt thicker today. The trees seemed to lean in, just slightly, like a crowd pushing in around a story they were too eager to hear. Around dusk, a man appeared outside the station. He wore a uniform, though the details were off, badges missing, colors faded or strangely arranged. He stood silently outside, neither knocking nor announcing his presence. He simply waited until I opened the door. He didn't look like a visitor, more like he belonged to the place, like he was another gear in its machinery. He asked a single question. Did the beacon light yet? Something told me I shouldn't answer, but before I could stop myself, I said, "Not yet." He smiled with a strange calm, simply with quiet certainty, and said, "It will soon," before disappearing into the trees. I watched him until he vanished between the trunks. The air felt heavier after that. Who was he? Not just some drifter or forest hiker, that much was certain. His calm, his timing, the way he asked about the beacon as if he already knew, and the whole moment felt rehearsed or preordained. Was he a ranger from some other post, a local? Number. He didn't carry himself like a man used to explaining things. He carried himself like a reminder, a prompt, like he was there to test if I'd forgotten my role. Or maybe he wasn't a man at all. That thought stayed with me long after he'd gone, coiling in the back of my mind as the forest began to shift from dusk to night. The evening arrived without warning. The sky dimmed in slow motion, and the clouds swallowed what little light remained. I prepared early, packed a flashlight, a spare bulb for the tower, a flare, and the notebook. The rule list didn't mention anything about traveling through the forest at that hour, but that didn't mean it was safe. At 1:46 a.m., I glanced out the cabin window. The tower light was still on, blinking steadily like a distant heartbeat. I checked again at 2:03, still on. At 2:04, the light cut out. The light vanished instantly. 1 second it was there, the next, nothing. A dead eye in the dark. My pulse spiked. I grabbed my pack and stepped outside. The woods were waiting. The fog returned, thicker now, clinging to the ground like a second skin. My flashlight barely reached past the first few trees. Every step forward felt like entering a mouth. Halfway there, I heard hooves. Deliberate, heavy, measured, behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. It was the elk. Again it paced me, moving in silence with steady steps. Just moving alongside, just far enough away that I could never quite see it. Then it appeared ahead of me again. Its one antler caught the beam of my flashlight. The rest of its body stayed shadow. Its form was wrong again, taller, the joints too angular, the skin too thin. Something inside it moved. It turned into the woods. My hands shook. I clutched the flare. Every step closer to the tower felt like a dare. The elk stayed on the edge of my vision the whole way. At 2:11 a.m., I reached the base. The control panel was cold. The key stuck for a moment before turning. I flipped the manual reset switch. Nothing. Then a whine. A long, high-pitched keening from the woods. It sounded wrong, like it didn't belong to any creature I knew. The light blinked back on at 2:12 a.m. A breeze cut across my neck, thick with the smell of moss and something wet and dying. The cables above crackled once, faint and sharp. I didn't move closer. The rule echoed in my head. After reactivating the beacon, never linger too long near the wiring. Some nights they buzz with more than electricity. I held still until the tower buzzed steady, then stepped back without looking up. Then I ran. Back in the cabin, I locked the door and checked the logbook. A new entry had been made, my handwriting again. But I hadn't written it. You almost didn't. Below it, smeared ink like something had touched the page with wet fingers. A chill prickled my skin. Could it have been him, the man from earlier? Did he come back while I was gone, leave this behind like some kind of message? But how would he have copied my handwriting so perfectly? Or worse, was it me? Had I written it in some half-conscious state and forgotten? Neither answer comforted me. One felt impossible. The other is more terrifying. The ink was still damp. At 6:04 a.m., I made my note. Tower override succeeded at 2:12 a.m. Light is restored within the window. The elk did not leave. It walked the edge of the trees until dawn. I stayed inside. I did not follow. The man did not return, but I can't shake the thought that he was the one who left the message. Or maybe he was watching, waiting to see if I would fail. Fog wrapped the station like a hand. Somewhere, beyond the trees, something waited for the rule to be broken. The morning was colorless. A pale haze settled low over the treetops, the sun barely cutting through. The light made the forest look drained, like someone had wrung all the warmth from it. Birds didn't sing. The wind was dry and distant, brushing the treetops but never touching the ground. I woke with the weight of the previous night still in my chest. The logbook sat untouched since my last entry, but I checked it 3 times before noon anyway. No new handwriting, no new rule. Still, something buzzed beneath the surface of the day, like something was waiting. The emergency radio burst to life just past noon, and I wasn't anywhere near it. I was cleaning near the windows when the static kicked in, sharp and sudden like a whisper with teeth. I turned and saw the red light glowing on the unit. My hands froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it pressed in, a high-pitched hiss, stuttering, like something trying to force its way through a barrier. Then came the voice, twisted and soft, buried under the static. "Morgan, help." It was my name. Maybe. The voice cracked, stretched like it was dragged through gravel. The tone wasn't desperate. It was too calm for that. It sounded like a memory coming back wrong, like something pretending to remember me. I took a step closer. The red light flickered. The device buzzed louder, filling the cabin with a low vibration that sank into my chest. Rule number 2 was drilled into my head. If the emergency radio plays your voice, shut it off, right away. The voice wasn't mine, not completely, but it was close. Too close, like someone had studied every inflection, every breath, and stitched it together just off enough to make it worse. A version of me from somewhere I didn't want to imagine. I reached the table. My fingers hovered over the cord. The static popped again. This time it sounded like it laughed. A near-human rasp escaped, shaped like laughter but drained of intent. A broken rhythm that mimicked speech without saying anything. I yanked the cord from the socket. The light blinked, and the sound dragged out like it was being pulled apart. The noise faded, stretched thin, and then snapped away. Quiet. I left the radio where it was. Couldn't bring myself to face it again. Every time I looked, I expected it to glow without power, to speak even when it shouldn't. It didn't. But I still kept checking, waiting for it to try again. Around 3 p.m., I noticed movement in the distance. A group of campers, maybe 6 or 7, were weaving through the underbrush. They looked like ordinary hikers at first, dressed in flannel and parkas, some with backpacks slung low, others with walking sticks. But something about their pacing made me pause. They walked in a line, not quite military but close, their steps in rhythm. They didn't speak to one another, didn't glance around. Their eyes were fixed ahead, and they moved like they knew exactly where they were going, like they had done this walk dozens of times. One of them, a tall woman with dark braids and a yellow windbreaker, passed the ranger sign without blinking. Not once. Her face was still, unreadable. Her arms swayed at her sides, but too evenly, like she was moving on a loop. I pressed my face closer to the glass, careful not to make noise. Each one passed by without breaking stride. None of them looked toward the cabin. None blinked. They were headed toward Site 34. I knew the direction, knew the terrain. That part of the forest was rarely used. And now I understood why. That was rule number 4. Campers who don't blink go to Site 34. Do not visit Site 34. I stayed in the cabin. Hours passed. The woods dimmed. The fog began to roll in again, creeping low and thin across the underbrush. The silence pressed closer, A silence so thick it seemed to erase the noise itself. The kind of silence that made your heartbeat sound like shouting. Later, I stepped outside to clear my head, walking toward the edge of the western tree line. My boots crunched over twigs as the wind stirred the leaves. I needed space from the cabin, the rules, the strange rhythm of this place. The fog hadn't set in yet, but the air had that waiting stillness. That's when I saw something glinting just beneath the roots of a birch tree. At first I thought it was a coin. I knelt, brushed away the loose earth, and saw the face of an old pocket watch. The chain was tangled in moss, the cover dented, but the glass was intact. Rule number 5. If you find a pocket watch in the forest, bury it deep. I took it without touching the face, wrapped it in cloth. The ticking grew louder the moment it left the shelf. Louder and quicker, like it recognized what was happening. I grabbed the spade from the tool locker, flashlight in hand. The sun was gone now, only traces of light behind the tree line. I walked west, opposite the path to Site 34, into an area I hadn't yet explored. The trees leaned differently there. The soil was soft, like something had already been buried and unburied 100 times. I dug. The deeper I went, the harder it became. Roots twisted like fingers, refusing to move. The watch in the cloth thumped now, not ticked, thumped like a heartbeat. I pressed it into the earth and kept digging, forcing it deeper, past rock and root. When I let go, it kept pulsing through the dirt. I packed the soil fast. When I looked up, the fog had grown thicker, closer, and someone was standing at the tree line. One of the campers, the one who hadn't blinked. I froze. My flashlight dimmed, flickered, then steadied. The figure stood still and silent, just watched, then turned and disappeared into the trees. My breath caught, and in that moment, something deeper settled in realization. That camper stood unblinking, her gaze steady and intentional. It was as if she knew I'd find the watch, knew I'd look up right then, a message or a test. I replayed the rules in my head, but they felt like fragments now. Site 34, the radio, the watch, disconnected pieces of a larger map I didn't have. What if these rules served as containment measures? What if I hadn't just witnessed something strange, but triggered something waiting to be seen? A thought gnawed at me. Maybe they don't blink because they no longer need to. Maybe blinking is for those still tethered to time, to choice. If they'd surrendered those things, what was I surrendering by staying? I didn't follow. I stayed in place, and part of me wondered what would happen if I moved any closer. Would I stop blinking too? On the way back, I passed the marker for D12, a new one. I'd walked this path before. That marker hadn't been there yesterday. It was old, wood faded, numbers carved in a rough, unfamiliar script. Back at the cabin, the watch's echo stayed in my ears. The rhythm pulsed deep and steady, like it had been absorbed by the soil, but still wanted out. I marked the logbook. Pocket watch buried. Northwest clearing, roughly 3 feet deep. Recheck if uncovered. I locked the door and double-checked the rule board. Still 8, still the same, but someone had added a note beneath rule number 4. Site 34 perimeter expanded. New boundary at marker stone D12. I never wrote that, and no one else had been inside. I checked the door again, then the windows, everything locked. The ink on the note hadn't fully dried. I sat in the chair by the fire with the flashlight on my lap, staring at the door. An hour passed, maybe more. I heard movement outside, feet crunching softly over dry leaves. The wind died completely. Then a knock. A knock came at the window. Software deliberate. 3 times. I stayed still, completely silent, just sat frozen, flashlight beam trained on the wall. Another knock, this time at the back, then the sound of breathing, heavy, right outside. I stood slowly and stepped to the corner, peering around just enough to see. Nothing. Only trees and fog. I didn't sleep. I didn't look out the window again. When the light finally returned, I checked the perimeter. No trace of movement around it. But the fog hadn't lifted, not even with the sun. Somewhere out there the campers waited. They moved, silent and constant. I began to suspect Site 34 was more than a place. It felt like a path, a call, a pull, and now that I'd seen them, it was pulling me too. I woke up before the alarm. The sky outside was a pale smear of gray, and the fog clung low to the trees like it hadn't moved all night. Something about the silence inside the cabin felt exaggerated, like the walls were listening. I rubbed my eyes and sat up, scanning the familiar shapes of the rule board. 8 rules. Always 8. I had read them so many times that I could recite them backward, but this morning they felt less like orders and more like warnings. I moved slowly, performing the same rituals I did every morning: brew coffee, stretch my legs, run a perimeter check, and document the weather. The mundane routines offered little comfort. Each familiar action seemed surrounded by a halo of suspicion. The cabin creaked with tension. Even the light filtering through the window felt forced. I filled in the logbook, recording temperature, cloud cover, fog density, all standard. Then I stared at rule number 4 for nearly 5 minutes. Campers who don't blink go to Site 34. Do not visit Site 34. Their faces came back to me, blank, wide-eyed, disturbingly synchronized. They weren't simply people anymore. Their forms had become something rehearsed, molded into a disturbing precision, reprogrammed. It felt like they were doing more than just walking. They were enacting a script, and I was the only one who didn't know the lines. I needed air, needed space, needed to see something that didn't follow a rule. I took my flashlight and headed south, leaving the cabin and its haunted quiet behind. I passed familiar markers, rocks I'd stepped over, and branches I'd trimmed weeks ago. But then I turned down a path I'd never taken. A steep incline, partly hidden by undergrowth, led to a section of the woods I hadn't explored. The air grew colder. The trees thinned. And halfway up a shallow ridge behind a wall of tangled pine roots, I found it. A hatch, metal and rusted, nearly overtaken by moss and earth. The surface was bare, with a single keyhole placed at the center. The key, one of 4 I was given on my first day. The woman who hired me never explained where each one led, only saying I'd understand when the moment was right. Until now, this one had remained silent, waiting. I pulled it from my jacket pocket. It was heavier than I remembered. Just as I knelt to test the fit, a figure moved behind me, a blur. Silent. "Don't do that," came a voice, dry as leaves. I turned and saw him. He wore the same uniform as me, though older, worn thin at the edges. His skin had a brittle look, sun-faded and lined with cracks. His boots barely touched the soil. "You're not supposed to be here," I said. "Neither are you," he replied. He moved closer, stopping just short of arm's reach. His name tag had been scratched off completely. He didn't blink. "Who are you?" "I was you," he said. "Or maybe I still am. This forest bends more than just space." He nodded at the hatch. "Whatever's in there, it's not meant to be let out. Not even looked at. That door only leads to entrapment." I tried to respond, but his eyes pulled at something inside me. I blinked, and he was gone. No sound of movement, no footprints, just fog, whispering like cloth on skin. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I felt weightless. It wasn't fear that held me. It was a heavy, pervasive uncertainty. I had seen someone clear as anything. His boots hovered above the soil, his voice had scratched at memory, and his eyes, they were hollow, but not empty. They saw me with a familiarity I hadn't earned. The forest hadn't just created an illusion. It had crafted a story, tailored to me. I questioned if what I saw was ever there at all, or if the trees had taken pieces of my past, my doubts, and stitched them into something with just enough weight to seem real. Was he a ghost of a ranger who came before, or a puppet animated by the will of this place? My heart said he was warning me. My head wasn't so sure. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the fog shift, trying to catch a sound that would tell me I hadn't imagined it all. I marked the location mentally and stood frozen for a long moment, the key still clenched in my palm. My hand trembled. Every instinct told me to leave it, to not disturb what had been buried beneath time and moss. I backed away from the hatch, the key slipping back into my pocket like it belonged there no longer. The ridge behind me seemed steeper on the return. As I descended, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Night fell without incident. I sat inside the cabin, staring at the map on the wall. My eyes kept drifting east to Site 34. The forest around it was unmarked, an omission that seemed louder than any note. At 1:10 a.m., I packed light, flashlight, pen, map. The silence in the cabin had started to press on me, heavy and persistent. The thought of Site 34 clawed at the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the image of those campers and their synchronized steps. Something about their synchronized presence suggested an unspoken order. What were they doing out there? Why did they never blink? I needed to know. Driven by a deeper urge, whatever was happening in that clearing felt like the center of everything. This pursuit had nothing to do with rules. It was entirely about uncovering the truth that had been lurking just beyond the edge of everything I understood. I told myself I'd just observe, just look. But something deeper already knew. I was going because I needed answers. I followed the eastern trail. The deeper I went, the straighter the path became. Trees stood at perfect intervals, their trunks eerily identical. The smell of pine was absent. The forest had fallen silent, devoid of the usual life that filled its canopy and floor. Then the clearing. 7 figures were seated around a fire pit. A low, flickering flame danced in the center, casting long, twitching shadows across their motionless forms, their posture flawless, unmoving. Then they spoke. In a tongue I didn't understand. The structure was unfamiliar but deliberate. Something constructed. A language that followed rules of its own. Their mouths moved together. They didn't blink. I crouched, hidden behind a low thicket. The cold sank into my bones, anchoring me to the earth. I watched the campers through the veil of branches. Their eyes stayed still and locked onto the fire pit as if waiting for something unseen. They never shifted, never flinched, and certainly never blinked. It was like watching statues breathe. I stayed perfectly still, afraid that even the sound of my pulse would give me away. But they didn't react. They didn't see me. It was as though I wasn't there at all. Their lips moved in perfect unison, reciting something rhythmic and foreign. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the cadence, repetitive and ritualistic. It looked like a ceremony, a precise, intentional rite, carried out with the focus of something sacred. My hand cramped around the flashlight. I didn't dare move. A sound stirred at the edge of the clearing. A figure emerged, a white deer, spectral and graceful, as if it had stepped out of the moonlight itself. Its coat shimmered faintly, nearly translucent, and a single antler curved like sculpted ivory. It walked slowly into the circle of campers, weaving between them without hesitation. They didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge its presence. It was as if they were part of the same ritual, sharing an understanding I couldn't grasp. The deer paused at the center, firelight brushing its sides in warm flickers. Then it turned its head. Its eyes met mine. I didn't move. Couldn't. The stare held me in place, and for a breathless moment, the world contracted. There was the ceremony, the forest, and even breath itself vanished into silence. That look consumed all else. Then it blinked once, deliberately, and turned east. The deer glowed faintly in the moonlight, its single antler rising like an ivory spire. Unlike the rugged creature I had glimpsed before, this being felt angelic, almost unreal. Its coat shimmered like frost over still water, and its movements carried an otherworldly grace. Then it walked east. I stood. My heart pounded, but my body moved. I followed. The forest thickened, yet the path cleared. Stones lined the way, each etched with 3 concentric circles and a vertical line. They pulsed gently as I passed. I didn't think about the signal tower, not once. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 2:04 a.m., the time the signal dies. I knew what it meant. I knew I should have turned back, run to the tower, flipped the switch, and restored the pulse that kept the forest quiet. But I didn't. I couldn't. The deer moved with a pull I couldn't resist. The rules screamed in my memory, but they faded behind the thrill of revelation. I wasn't just breaking one rule. I was about to break 2. I paused, for a breath. Maybe 2. Then I followed the deer deeper into the woods. It disappeared just before a spiral-shaped clearing. At the center stood a door. No walls, no roof, just a green-painted door standing alone. The wood shimmered faintly as it breathed, the air changed, the temperature rose, the trees leaned inward, and the forest spoke. I thought I had time. My voice, clear and measured. Then another. "You heard me. You left anyway." My sister's voice, the one who vanished here when we were children. I hadn't remembered that day in years, but the voice reached memory. It rang with accusation. The ground shifted, soft, almost liquid. Bark peeled from trees in slow, spiraling patterns. A breeze touched my neck, warm and rancid. I turned. The path had vanished. Stones erased. Darkness gathered at the edges of everything. I ran. The trees groaned. The sky pulsed with faint red streaks. Branches clawed at my arms. Shadows moved in my periphery, fast and crawling. I reached the cabin, gasping, threw the door shut, locked it, then again. I looked at my watch. 2:14 a.m. The signal should have been restored a minute ago. I had missed the window. The rule board hadn't changed. I stood there, breathing shallowly, realizing what I had done. I had broken 2 rules, and maybe rule for campers too. And now the air felt tighter. Every movement of mine seemed accounted for, measured. The forest outside breathed in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It moved with intention, stirred by a presence that infused every shift of air. The sound resonated in a different register, one that bypassed ears and sank directly into thought. The forest spoke without speaking, and I understood without comprehension, and it knew my name. It knew everything. The second moon. The morning after the signal died wasn't morning at all. The sky held no light. The sun should have risen by now, but the air remained a shadowed gray, as if the forest refused to release the night. I stepped outside, and every sound I expected, the bird call and the wind brushing through pine, was gone. In its place was a deep, ambient hum, low and constant. It vibrated through the soil. I took 5 steps from the cabin and stopped. The trail I'd always used was gone. It hadn't been overgrown or trampled. It had simply vanished as if the forest had wiped its memory of it overnight. Trees leaned closer than before. Bark peeled in symmetrical spirals. Moss moved. It didn't just respond to the air. It shifted with intent, as though aware of its place. The signal's absence created a silence that allowed something else to wake. Something that was always there, sleeping beneath the static. I returned to the rule board, half expecting new text. It remained unchanged, but the space beneath Rule 8 felt fuller, as though invisible ink hovered just out of sight. I rubbed my eyes. The walls of the cabin pulsed faintly, as though breathing. At noon, I saw the old ranger again, standing silently by the hatch I had nearly opened. His posture was still, arms folded in front of him, face unreadable. The air around him felt heavier, as if it bent inward. As I approached, His presence grew more vivid, like he had always been there, waiting for the moment to return. "You let the forest speak," he said. His voice sounded aged and worn, yet carried a resonance that settled in the chest. I stepped closer, uncertain if what I was seeing could even be called a person. There was something translucent about him, as if light passed through places it shouldn't. "You're not real," I said, though it came out more like a question than a statement. His smile didn't warm his face. "None of us are, once we enter." He watched me, unmoving, not blinking. I searched my memory, trying to remember if I'd ever seen him blink at all. "We were caretakers," he said. "We kept the balance, maintained the order, followed the rules before the rules followed us. And then, the story needed bodies, not watchers. We became placeholders." I wanted to speak, but my mouth stayed closed. The ranger's voice continued, steady and deliberate. "This place rewrites roles to stay alive. It draws in those who listen and turns them into characters it can't discard. Campers, wanderers, those who no longer blink. You've seen them. They weren't always like that." His hand lifted, pointing toward the tree line. "The hatch you found isn't just a door. It's a reset. One story ends there, and another begins. The forest doesn't move in one direction. Time circles back, waits for a new beginning, and picks a familiar face to play the same part again." I looked at the hatch, the cold metal seeming to breathe in rhythm with the woods. The key in my pocket felt like it pulsed, as if syncing with something underground. "If I open it, you might find yourself at the start again," he said, "maybe as someone younger, maybe someone else entirely. But the forest remembers. It always finds you again." A question pushed up through my thoughts. "And if I don't?" He stared for a long moment, his eyes hollow and knowing. "Then you stay. You fight if you can, or run, though there's nowhere far enough. There's another tower to the east. It still hums. That one sends the last signal. Maybe it leads somewhere different. Maybe that one breaks the loop." Before I could respond, the old ranger turned. His form blurred, as if the forest itself folded around him. He stepped behind a tree that had not existed moments earlier, and as I instinctively moved to follow, I found only stillness. The tree was gone, and so was he. I remained there, staring at the empty space where he had stood, mind churning through everything he had said. My fingers brushed the key in my pocket. The idea of starting over, of being dragged into the same cycle again, made my stomach tighten. But the second tower, the idea of an exit or a possibility, burned brighter in my chest. Could I find it? Could I endure what the forest would place between me and that tower? I turned my gaze to the eastern tree line, the direction he had pointed. Shadows hung there like heavy curtains, thick and waiting. I knew whatever path lay ahead would demand more than endurance. It would demand that I challenge every rule I had followed, everything I thought kept me safe. I wasn't ready. But the moment was coming. That night, I sat at the cabin window, eyes locked on the eastern ridge. The moon had already passed full days ago. But there it was again, perfectly round, hanging heavy above the trees. And then, beside it, rising slow and unmistakable, came another. A second moon. The sight of it froze the breath in my lungs. My eyes scanned the sky again, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. 2 full orbs now hovered above the treetops, one silver, one with a faint amber hue, both impossibly clear. I felt a shift in the air pressure, as though the forest inhaled in unison. My pulse thudded in my ears, a primal reaction stirring in the back of my mind. Rule number 8 had never felt real until now, but this was different. It was sacred. It was wrong. Something ancient was waking. I stood frozen as the air around me grew thick and damp, pressing against my skin like steam trapped in stillness. A deep, resonant knock shattered the quiet, once, then again, then a third time. Each impact reverberated through the floorboards, slow and deliberate. The sound hadn't come from the door. Glass quivered. I turned my head toward the window, eyes already wide, breath held as if noise alone might summon more. The knocks had come from there. Something stood just beyond the pane, waiting. Outside stood 3 campers. Their eyes were glazed with white. Unnaturally pristine, as though whatever once made them human had been carefully erased. Behind them, in the dark, I saw shapes. Tall, crooked, masks of bark and antler. Bodies like living branches. Motionless. Watching. One camper stepped closer to the window, his pale face bathed in moonlight. His lips parted into a smile that didn't reach his hollow eyes, a gesture stretched too wide, too deliberate. Slowly, deliberately, he mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." The sound of his voice seeped through the cabin walls, carried on no breath or voice, but transmitted as if it bypassed sound altogether and went straight to the bone. It rang out with eerie precision, devoid of breath or warmth. "You set us free." The words hit like ice, sinking deep. I stumbled back, heart hammering, unable to look away. They made no move to come inside. They stood, a living tableau of release and reverence, while behind them, the branch creatures shifted in a slow rhythm. The forest seemed to pulse with them, like a choir I couldn't hear, like a ceremony just beginning. I ran out the front door, crashing through the trees, each step driven by a memory etched into panic. The storm shelter sat further south, nestled beneath brush and root beyond the dry creek bed, veiled in the forest's quiet camouflage. Branches lashed my arms and tore at my clothes, the undergrowth clutching like fingers. My breath came in ragged bursts, and my chest burned with the effort. Behind me, the forest moved. When I reached the shelter, my hands fumbled with the latch, nearly dropping the key. I threw it open, dropped inside, and slammed the hatch down above me. Darkness swallowed everything. Only my breath kept me company, echoing off the concrete walls. Rule number 8 wasn't just a warning. It was a mercy. In the silence, huddled beneath the earth, I thought of her. The woman who handed me the keys without explanations, who told me some doors would open in time. She knew. She had to. Yet her eyes had never betrayed cruelty. There was something else there. Regret, pity. Was this place her prison too, or her creation? Was sending me here an act of betrayal, or warped protection? I couldn't tell. I didn't know if I hated her for it or felt sorry. Maybe both. The shelter felt safe, but safety had proven to be temporary. I wondered if this refuge was another lure, another fold in the loop meant to keep me still. The thought refused to leave me. Tomorrow I would move, and tomorrow I had to find the tower, the one that might still be humming, the one that might break this. The shelter's hatch groaned as I pushed it open. Light spilled inside, a pale, dust-choked haze that wasn't quite a morning. My boots found the forest floor, and the moment I stood, I knew something essential had shifted. The trees leaned differently, their branches curved as if listening. The underbrush pulsed with movement I couldn't quite trace. The world had reassembled itself during the night. Above, the sun hung at an odd angle, neither rising nor setting, suspended in a limbo of amber glow. I felt no warmth from it. Before leaving, I searched the shelter's interior. The air was stale, but the shelves held supplies, aged cans of beans, a dusty water filter, some rope, and a rusted multi-tool. I packed what I could into a small canvas sack. Under the bench, I found a half-used flare and a roll of gauze. A cracked compass lay beneath it, needle jittering even when held still. I slipped it into my pocket. If the forest was going to twist again, I wanted to have something that still claimed direction, however broken. I stepped into this new forest with my breath held. The rules had fractured. The air itself crackled with the residue of broken order. I moved east, the path toward the second tower etched faintly into my mind, a ghost trail I hoped would be enough. As I passed the cabin, the silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like anticipation. Shapes moved between the trees, tall, pale figures, campers whose eyes no longer blinked, accompanied by the forest-born things with limbs like branches and faces concealed behind wooden masks. They drifted across the trail, never in haste, but always watching. I crouched low behind a fallen log and waited. Their passage left the ground darker, their steps pulling shadows along with them. When I moved again, I stayed low. I had become a trespasser in my own reality. The path took me near the metal hatch embedded in the roots of a skeletal tree, the door I had nearly opened. I paused, my hand brushing the key in my pocket. The old ranger's words echoed in my head, each syllable lodged deeper than memory. This was a way out, maybe even salvation. But salvation offered by a loop was another word for surrender. My hand tightened on the key. I stared at the hatch until the forest bent its breath around me. Then I turned away. The eastern trail narrowed. Trees grew closer, tighter. Leaves whispered names I didn't recognize. I thought of her, the woman who had given me the keys. I tried to recall her voice and her expression, to understand what she wanted from me. Protection? Sacrifice? I couldn't tell if I'd been sent here to escape something or become part of it. Maybe that had always been the same. Then my thoughts drifted to the old ranger. His eyes had held knowledge, pain, and something close to resignation. Had he warned me out of guilt or duty? Was he trying to guide me, or just ensuring the pattern continued? Doubt curled inside me like smoke. Could I trust him? Or was he too just another branch of this forest's will, repeating a role that someone else had once handed him? I stumbled over a patch of soft ground, and the sound reached me before the recognition did. A faint ticking. Steady. Rhythmic. Like a wound trying to remember its origin. I turned slowly. The earth split slightly beside a stump, and there it was, the pocket watch. It had surfaced. There was no wind and no sign of disturbance in the soil. It had simply appeared. Its silver face glinted under the muted light. My breath caught. I picked it up, feeling its pulse in my hand, a rhythm more akin to a heartbeat than a clock, like it wanted to be heard. I tucked it into my jacket, and something in the forest shifted again. Within the hour, I knew it had changed me. The creatures turned more easily toward where I passed. The silence around me felt denser, as if my presence drew gravity. I tried to stay hidden, but the forest no longer respected my attempts. I ducked beneath thick roots when I heard footsteps, holding my breath as shadows lengthened. The pale campers passed me, but one stopped, turned. He looked directly at the hollow where I lay and smiled, his face soft and almost tender, the kind of expression that might belong to someone greeting a friend. "Thank you," he said, though the words didn't pass through the air. They arrived through something deeper, as if my bones had become tuning forks. "You gave us freedom. Now come. Join us." His voice echoed strangely, layered with something behind it, as though 1,000 whispers were tangled in the roots of his words. Then the others stepped forward. The masked figures, with limbs twisted like carved wood, stood in formation. One after another they began to speak, not in unison, but staggered, slightly off-beat, their words overlapping. "Thank you. Come. Join us." Each repetition built upon the last. Their voices gained volume, with a weight that surpassed volume, filling every corner of the air, until the forest itself seemed to hum with it. The air vibrated. The trees quivered. It had evolved beyond sound and became a resonance that coursed through everything, as if I had stumbled into the heart of a hive, and they were the swarm. The words no longer made sense individually. Together they became something else. A living chant, a call from the forest itself. My heart surged. I tore myself from the hollow and ran. Branches clawed at my jacket. My legs found direction in desperation. I reached a mound, dove into a hollow beneath its base, and crouched, panting. My fingers found the watch. Its ticking had become erratic. A single thought bloomed like fire. I had to sever the pull. I slammed it against a rock, once, twice. On the third strike, the glass shattered. The ticking ceased. Silence returned. The watch had become a beacon, drawing the forest's creations toward me, tethering me to their awareness. Destroying it was the only way to cut the signal they followed. Light bent above me. The sun flickered, then steadied, then dimmed. A second later, it was night. In the next, it was morning again. Time had cracked. My destruction of the watch had broken something fundamental. I sat in the hollow, heart still thudding, and for the first time, I wondered if any of this was visible to someone beyond the trees. If another ranger stepped into this place, would they see two moons in the sky? Would they hear the voices tangled in the leaves, or feel the shift in time as I had? Or was I alone in this breakdown? The thought clawed at me. I needed to know if I was the only one unraveling. I needed to understand if the madness was mine or shared. In that void of rhythm, I waited. Hours passed in seconds, or maybe the reverse. I emerged finally, the world no longer linear. I caught sight of the tower again, distant and draped in moss, a relic that had waited too long. I moved toward it, but the forest had one more test. From the edges of my vision, shadows peeled away, campers with eyes blank, the masked creatures flanking them. They converged, slow and certain, from every angle. My pulse spiked. I turned and bolted. Roots reached for my ankles. Branches lashed my face. I dodged between trunks, breath ragged, boots slipping on damp earth. The tower loomed, closer now, but so did they. I reached the base, my fingers fumbling at the rusted ladder. I climbed, my limbs shaking as voices rose beneath, chanting without words, a pressure that scraped at the edges of my thoughts. I pulled myself onto the platform. The panel blinked, waiting. I slammed the lever down. The forest screamed. A shockwave of sound surged outward with a crushing resonance, a density that pressed through everything, flattening the world below. I looked down. Everything had frozen. The campers, the masked beings, locked in place as if caught mid-motion. A stillness like death, like absolution. And then came the light. A figure stepped into the clearing. The deer. The same one that had drawn me before. But it had changed again. Its body shimmered, radiant with unnatural purity. One antler, curved like a crescent moon. It met my eyes. It met my eyes and held the gaze. For a moment, the world paused around us. Then, a single tear fell from the deer's eye, catching the light as it slid down its luminous face. It became a surrender, a ritual in motion. The deer collapsed with a grace that felt chosen. Its form dimmed, the radiant glow retreating. Bones curled inward, flesh wilted. It sank into the earth, dissolving into a slow decay that fed the moss and roots like nourishment. Watching it disappear, I felt a weight press against my chest. This wasn't just death. It was a sacrifice, a release. Another cycle closed, and I had witnessed it, maybe even caused it. I climbed down. The clearing stood empty,